This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal.
In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade.
It looks like one of those scenes of an old building being purposely dynamited and blown.
When we are successful,
I'm just a patsy,
and we will be.
We're ready to come to the microphone, so we'll listen up.
A new world order.
So my name's Robbie Parker.
It might have appeared that way, but from my close-up inspection, there's no evidence of a plane having crashed anywhere near the Pentagon.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th.
President Kennedy died at 1 p.m.
Live from the Media Broadcasting Center.
This is Jim Fetzer, your host on the Real Deal, with my very special guest today, Nick Kollerstorm, who's a historian of science from the UK, the world's leading expert on the London 7/7 subway bombings, where his book, Terror on the Tube, is now in its 3rd edition, where Nick cracked the case by discovering that the train from Luton, that the 4 young Muslim lads who'd apparently been induced to participate in a drill that morning had been canceled, which meant they weren't even able to be at the tube stops when the carriages exploded. The whole thing was a sham run by a private public entity under the control of Peter Power. More about that. But today, Nick, who is also an expert on 9/11, is addressing Building 7, where it all went wrong. Nick, great to have you here, my friend.
Yes, pleasure to be back again, Jim. I don't know if I'm an expert on 9/11, but I have been a founder member of the old British 9/11 Truth Group. I was there at the first meeting and the last, and it always fascinates me. And I've got various old essays I've done in years gone by, Jim. And I'll tell you what, I think our angle is on this Building 7. When false flag terror is perpetrated, it doesn't always go as expected. And the bit that goes wrong, some part of the plan goes wrong, that is of a special interest to see how the whole damn thing was designed. And the analogy is what you just said with the London bombing. I discovered that those 4 lads were late getting up to London. They were too late to fulfill their assigned roles, and the whole story had to be adjusted by the perps to make up for the fact that those 4 patsies were too late to play the proper roles. So I think there's a interesting analogy here with 9/11 and how the perpetrators cope with something not happening as scheduled.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right, Nick. And we'll take a look here. You want to tell us about Lucky Larry?
Okay. Well, he was, let me first say, before we start, just to start off, the 9/11 event, with its astounding impact, was designed to happen in less than 3 hours, okay? It started at 8:18 when the first hijacker call came through. Our plane has been hijacked, and it ended at 11 o'clock when basically the FBI then announced 19 hijackers very, very quickly. And at that time, 11 o'clock, which will concern us, the huge amount of dust from the big collapse explosion was just settling out, okay? It was all meant to happen in those 3 hours, and then that same evening, President Bush was going to declare that America was at war and who the enemy was, and so forth. So,
and isn't it the case, Nick, that the early identification of the perps is a sign of false flag events?
Totally, yeah, totally. I mean, the idea that they could just read out who the 19 Arab hijackers were without the police having to do any investigation, whatever, as you say, it's an obvious dead giveaway. Anyway, Building 7 was meant to come down. This is what we're going to argue today, with all the tremendous smoke and impact, and it was meant to fall down without anyone seeing it because of all the smoke around everywhere, and it didn't. It somehow stayed up, and 5:20, it then finally came down in a totally bizarre manner that will always be absurd. It will never make sense because it wasn't meant to come down then. Okay, let's examine that argument here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Go forward.
Right. So Lucky Larry takes over the World Trade Center very shortly before the event, mere weeks before the event, and in the first week of September, his Silverstone Properties assumed full control of the whole complex. And we remind ourselves, the whole complex is 7 buildings, 7 World Trade Center buildings. You ask people how many buildings were demolished on that fateful day. I think the answer is 7, and people will hardly ever say that. 3 big skyscrapers, but altogether 7 World Trade Center buildings, so it's the week before they really get control of it, and we experienced the very meaning of Chutzpah with what Lucky Larry arranged on the very morning of 9/11. Okay, Silverstone Properties made a meeting in the North Tower with Port Authority officials to discuss how to prepare for a terrorist attack.
And the meeting was cancelled.
Right. Okay. Now, just have a few diagrams just to get a picture. Here are the different colours. The green ones are not World Trade Center. I think these are ones that were in some degree damaged, and the central ones in red and beige are World Trade Center. Okay.
And of course, the 3 in red are 1, 2, the North Tower, the South, and then World Trade Center 7, which is the focus of our conversation today.
Right, and we're supposed to believe that from World Trade Center 1, debris fell onto World Trade Center 7,
which had to go over World Trade Center 6 to reach World Trade Center 7.
Yeah,
it's all highly implausible from the beginning. But Nick, here's another schematic of the relationship.
Yeah, well, just to say, the previous slide had the Hudson River, which is very important because of the dancing Israelis who filmed the event from I think it's the other side of the Hudson River. So
that's right.
Geographically very important, and the whole astonishing design of the enormous World Trade Centers right next to a river is a wonderful achievement of America. Shows American ingenuity and enterprise. It was a kind of miracle that the collapse did not damage the what's called the bathtub, so no flooding took place of Lower Manhattan. Okay, this diagram. Let's just go back a minute. This diagram has north as well up the top, so you can see the north-south orientation. World Trade Center is north of the other buildings, and in between is Vesey Street. That's where the fabled passport fluttered down from the World Trade Center 1 impact of one of the hijackers. So if we got our bearings from this, that some buildings are impacted, and for example around the Bankers Trust, and do burn, right? But there's no hint of anything collapsing, as what happens with World Trade Center 7. So we accept that the debris from this titanic explosion does set buildings on fire, but there's no hint of any collapse. Okay, now the NIST report, go to the next one. This is 2008. The NIST report makes out that what happened to all the other buildings was due to fallout from these 2 explosions, World Trade Center 1 and 2. And this is their diagram of the range of sort of catastrophic damage. Okay.
Relatively minor. The largest circumference extends slightly into WTC 7.
Only slightly, yeah. But you can see, for example, the buildings next to, sorry, just go back a minute, buildings next to Bankers Trust, those burnt quite a bit. A whole lot of stuff fell on from the roof of World Trade Center 2. It was leaning over due south. They got hit and they burnt quite intensively for a day or so. And the Bankers Trust was gouged out. So there is damage around here, but World Trade Center 7 is only just within that region. Okay.
And there you can see where WTC 7 in the background there is completely destroyed, with the post office to its right and Verizon to its left, and how all the other WTC buildings are destroyed as though the targets were all and only buildings with WTC designation.
Absolutely, yeah. Everything owned by Larry Silverstein was totally demolished. And as you say, the post office and Verizon just examined those are just one street away from the Building 7, and they're still okay. I mean, that post office is still up now, isn't it, Jim?
Yes, yes.
It's still up now. So amazing collapse of 47-story building into very, very little, and the buildings next to it are still okay. That is an extraordinary act of controlled demolition. We assume that's what it was, and that building imploded. It's utterly different from what happened to the two towers, which exploded.
Yes. Yes,
So-
this is the kind of result you'd expect from controlled demolition, not from somehow the inadvertent attacks by 19 Islamic terrorists flying planes into buildings. It's really inconsistent, and that can be demonstrated many different ways.
Yeah, and around the south here, we see this big dark building. That's the Deutsche Bank. That was hit. It was quite badly hit by the South Tower, and the front side burnt away, but there's no hint of it collapsing at all. Right.
Here's some video footage about the building we're talking about, Nick.
That's floors 13 and 14 now.
In the World Trade Center complex is on fire and has either collapsed or is collapsing.
You hear that? Keep your eye on that building as it's coming down. The building is about to blow up. Move it back.
Is Building 7 at the World Trade Center, and that building is in danger of collapse as it continues to burn.
According to authorities at this moment here in Lower Manhattan. And that is the growing fear that another building in the World Trade Center complex, which was not struck by an airplane, is in danger of collapsing.
He was down there, he was trying to help people, and then down.
Right.
So I was just standing there, we were watching the building actually because it was on fire, the bottom floors of the building were on fire, and, we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was, it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building.
Still concerned about a building right there.
And the windows all busted out, and it was horrifying.
One of those buildings, Building 7, I believe we said, in danger of collapsing.
Miller realizes that 7 World Trade Center is next to fall.
See what the white smoke is? You see this thing leaning like this? There's definitely no way to stop it.
No tall building had ever collapsed primarily due to fire. But that's exactly what investigators believe happened to the 47-story World Trade Center Building 7 on September.
Had moved back from that building before, what you're about to see again here on videotape, knowing that fire could not be fought because of the instability of the structure, because of the fire that had burned since shortly after 9 o'clock this morning.
Dana Tyler is joining us.
Okay.
If anybody out there can help, any vendors who have food or supplies, the firemen have no food, nothing but snacks. They need fluids, they need water, and they need protein foods. This is just the beginning of what they're facing. We need masks. We need TB masks. What is it?
Just went down.
What just went down?
World Trade Center.
Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
Okay.
This is Dan Rather.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Engineers are not just focusing on the Twin Towers. The most disturbing structural event was not that the Twin Towers fell, but that Tower 7, ignited by flying debris, fell due to fire alone.
In fact, it was preposterous that it should fall due to fire alone. As one commentator observed, Nick, no steel structure high-rise has ever collapsed due to fire alone before 9/11, after 9/11, nor, as we shall show, on 9/11.
Yes. Well, if we recall this wonderful video you just shown, Jim, it showed fires burning on floors 13 and 14, and then other fires on floor 7. Those are the main fires, and office fires, as NIST observes, burned for about 20 minutes. And the video of the actual collapse of the building, let's be clear, however much you enlarge that, you don't see any fires at all around that time of the collapse. The fires burn out around about 4 o'clock or 4:30, they finish. And NIST wanted to argue, NIST has to argue, that the fires began at 10:28 when the North Tower collapsed. And the point is that the evidence does not show that. When the dust settled around 11 o'clock, nobody saw any fires in Building 7. Nobody sees them until at least after noon, and maybe 1 or 2 o'clock. The first real evidence, first real testimonies of fires burning. So it seems to start a lot later in the afternoon, and you get a tremendous amount of smoke coming out of the building that we've seen, huge dust clouds. So the NIST hypothesis that the fires were started by the collapse of building of the North Tower does not very well correspond with the evidence.
Here's what we want to observe: 5.5 floors of debris, exactly what you'd expect from a controlled demolition, which leaves typically 12% of its original height, in this case 47 floors. We have just the debris you'd expect if this had been a controlled demolition.
Yeah, but it doesn't much look as if you got all the steel girders of the building in that pile, does it, Jim?
Well, this is just exactly what you get, Nick, from, innumerable instances of bringing it down. Remember, Dan Rather was saying this looks just like what happens when they use dynamite to bring down. He was alluding to hotels and casinos in Las Vegas. We've seen it many times. Okay. Here's the quick key witness, of course, Nick. Would you like to comment on Barry Jennings?
Okay, this is the key witness, and I'm sorry to say he paid for his life with this testimony, disappearing mysteriously just before a NIST report came out. He was called up by Giuliani. Giuliani had this specially prepared emergency room on, was it the 28th floor, and 23rd floor, and this Barry Jennings was called up. He was Deputy Director of the Emergency Service Department of New York Housing Authority. So him, and also a chap called Michael Hess, who was a top lawyer in charge of New York lawyers, those were both summoned up, and they got the phone call immediately after the North Tower was hit, which was that was, as it were, the evident beginning of the crisis. And they arrived at about 9 o'clock at that in that office, and they were there standing, listening or feeling the impact as the second plane hit the South Tower at 9:03 a.m. Those two were in the emergency room, or the crisis management room, and it was empty. This was the first astounding development that we get with the Building 7, and it's very much missed out from all the early stories that you hear in 9/11 Truth forums and books written, that these two guys arrived in the crisis management center by the mayor of New York, and it was empty, and coffee was on the desks, the smoke was still coming off it, half-eaten sandwiches, and that's it. I mean, it reminds me of the story of the Marie Celeste, where all the sailors had just vanished, and the people found their meals put out and wonder where everybody went to. Well, what had happened? And this is then compounded with the power going out of the World Trade Center 7. These guys, they managed to phone up, they get a message, leave right away, and they can't use the lifts because the power's gone. So this is 9 o'clock in the morning, or just after 9, maybe 9:15, and they start running down the stairs. And nobody talks about the astounding fact that this huge building had been evacuated, or it was being evacuated. I mean, how many people were there? 1,000? They'd only just got into work, presumably. And why don't we hear more stories of what happened to them? This is a very secretive, hushed up fact, because it wasn't supposed to happen, you see. What these guys experienced, emergency warning, get the hell out right away, evacuate the building.
And a fireman actually escorts him, Nick.
Yeah, okay, let's, now this is...
He's hearing explosions in the building, and a stairway is blown out from under him.
Yeah.
He was left hanging and had to climb back up.
Yeah, this is the 6th floor. We're about 9:30 in the morning, as far as we can tell, and this is exactly analogous to what Rodriguez hears in the basement of the North Tower a quarter of an hour later. This is the blast he hears synchronizes with whatever happens at the top of the North Tower. It's supposed to be a plane impact. Okay, so has this got? We're hypothesizing now. This has got something to do with the demolition process. This terrific bangs they heard. The huge lobby right at the base of Building 7 was trashed, and he had a terrible experience when he's trying to get to the lobby. First of all, they go up again. They go up to rescue themselves to the 8th floor, him and Hess, and they're trapped there. They can't get out. Shall we have next slide? Okay. Now, the firemen are too busy with everything else happening, and so they wait there until about 11 o'clock. And the firemen rescue them, and it's all in the dark. Where are we? He says, this was the lobby. And he can't believe it. The glorious lobby, the whole ground floor, and it's just in horrible ruins. So he's treading through a horrible ruin, and this is supposed to be, this is when the World Trade Center was supposed to have come down. When they got up, when they stayed at the 8th floor for an hour or so, they were hearing bangs going off. Okay, him and Hess, they heard bangs, and I'm suggesting this was when the whole building was supposed to come down, and it didn't work. Okay, next.
Yeah, well, here's Barry Jennings himself being interviewed, Nick. You're going to like this.
All right.
This was a completely admirable man, a true speaker, risked his life.
Yeah.
My name is Barry Jennings. 52 years old. I've worked for 33 years at one location. Basically, I said I'm married, father of 4. As I told you guys before, it's very funny. I was on my way to work, and traffic was excellent. I received a call that a small Cessna had hit the World Trade Center. I was asked to go and man the Office of Emergency Management at the World Trade Center 7 on the 23rd floor. As I arrived there were police all in the lobby. They showed me the way to the elevator. We got up to the 23rd floor. Me and Mr. Hess, who I didn't know was Mr. Hess at the time, we got to the 23rd floor. We couldn't get in. We had to go back down. Then security and police took us to the freight elevators where they took us back up, and we did get in.
Right.
Arriving into the OEM EOC, we noticed that everybody was gone. I saw coffee that was on the desk. Still, the smoke was still coming off the coffee. I saw half-eaten sandwiches, and only me, Mr. Hess, was up there. After I called several individuals, one individual told me that to leave and leave right away.
Right.
Mr. Hess came running back in and said, "We're the only ones up here. We got to get out of here." He found the stairwell. So we subsequently went to the stairwell, and we're going down the stairs. When we reached the 8th or the 6th floor, the landing that we were standing on gave way. There was an explosion, and the landing gave way. And I was left there hanging. I had to climb back up, and now I had to walk back up to the 8th floor. After getting to the 8th floor, everything was dark. It was dark, and it was very, very hot. Very hot. I asked Mr. Hess to test the phones as I took a fire extinguisher and broke out the windows. The firefighters came to the window because I was going to come out on the fire hose. I didn't want to stay there any longer. It was too hot. I I was going to come out of the fire hose. They came to the window. They started yelling, "Do not do that. It won't hold you." And then they ran away. See, I didn't know what was going on. That's when the first tower fell. When they started running, the first tower was coming down. I had no way of knowing that. Then I saw them come back. Now I saw them come back with more concern on their faces. And then they ran away again.
Oh.
So as they turned and ran the second time, the guy said, "Don't worry, we'll be back for you." And they did come back. This time they came back with 10 firefighters. And they kept asking me, "Where are you? We don't know where you are." I said, "I'm on the north side of the building," because when I was on the stairs, I saw north side. Excuse me. All this time, I'm hearing all types of explosions. All this time, I'm hearing explosions. When they finally got to us, and they took us down to what they called the lobby, because I asked them, I said, when we got down there, I said, "Where are we?" He said, "This was the lobby." And I said, "You got to be kidding me." It was total ruins. Total ruins. Now, keep in mind, when I came in there, the lobby had nice escalators. It was a huge lobby. And for me to see what I saw, it was unbelievable. And the firefighter that took us down kept saying, "Do not look down." And I kept saying, "Why?" I said, "Do not look down." And stepping over people. And you know you can feel when you're stepping over people. They took us out to a hole at I don't know who made this hole in this wall. That's how they got us out. They took us out to a hole through the wall to safety. Well, I'm just confused about one thing and one thing only. Why World Trade Center 7 went down in the first place. I'm very confused about that. I know what I heard. I heard explosions. The explanation I got was it was the fuel oil tank. I'm an old boiler guy. If it was a fuel oil tank, it would have been one side of the building. When I got to that lobby, the lobby was totally destroyed. It looked like King Kong had came through it and stepped on it. And it was so destroyed, I didn't know where I was. And it was so destroyed, they had to take me out to a hole in the wall, a makeshift hole that I believe the fire department made to get me out. Me and Mr. Hess out. They called me down. Which one? They were doing, I think it was part of the 9/11 Commission.
So was it the hearings at the new school?
No, I can't tell you where it was because.
Okay. Oh yeah, that's right.
But they called me down there, and they asked me the same questions that you guys are asking me. And at that point, they said, "Okay, thank you." They sent me on my way.
And yeah, you told them pretty much everything you just told us.
Yes.
You were in the building, got rock line,
Yes.
explosion, all that.
Yes.
And they didn't mention Building 7 once in the commissioner.
I told them that's where I was.
No,
That's
I know,
where I was.
but you know that they didn't mention the building at all.
I didn't give it too much thought. I thought they were just doing an into report or an investigation on what happened. They got my point of view, and I haven't heard any more from them. No, the explanation that I got was a few more tanks. No, I heard the explosions, and then the key thing was when the police officer came to me, he said, "We got reports of more explosions, so you have to run." Big talk.
And that's after both towers fell.
Yes. When we made it back to the 8th floor. As I told you earlier.
Yes.
Both buildings were still standing because I looked one way, looked the other way. Now there's nothing there. When I got to the 6th floor, before all this happened, when I got to the 6th floor, there was an explosion. That's what forced us back to the 8th floor. Both buildings were still standing. Keep in mind, I told you the fire department came and ran. They came twice. Why? Because building tower 1 fell, then tower 2 fell.
Right.
Then when they came back with all concern now, like to get me the hell out of there.
And of course, by 1 and 2, he means 2 and 1. He means the south tower, which fell first, and then, of course, later the north.
I didn't get out of there till like 1.
Yeah, that's right. Because the news report with Michael Hess was approximately
right
around 1 p.m.
Okay, well, is that enough now?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
But,
okay.
I mean, he's our key witness, Nick, and of course, they ignored him. They knew what he had to say. In the 9/11 Commission report, they don't even mention Building 1. And then subsequently, when they're forced to do an investigation about Building 7 just days before it's released, claiming that fires were responsible, Barry Jennings, who is in the position to contradict them based on his direct personal experience, mysteriously dies.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, the other thing that's totally omitted is this evacuation, and a NIST author says this. So at some stage of the NIST report, the entire population of Building 7 that morning was out of the building before the towers collapsed. Now, that's an extraordinary statement, and, you know, we'd like to hear a bit of testimony of the people working there. How many were evacuated, and what were they told? Seems rather strange to be...
How is that even possible, Nick? You know, how is that even possible? We have reports from witnesses who were told coming out of the north or south tower, they were told to go back in.
Exactly, yeah.
Go back in because they wanted to maximize the number of casualties.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. Well, next, shall we move on? Okay. Now, in line with this hypothesis that the whole building was meant to come down before 11 o'clock, i.e., when all the dust was around, it was meant to collapse with the others. We get these pre-scheduled reports of its collapse. So the Empire has prepared all these, and we get a whole string of them.
Yes.
It's quite a bit difficult for them to cancel them because it didn't actually happen. So
the players are on the script, Nick, but the physical events are not.
Yeah, right. So the first is a CNN correspondent reporting from Lower Manhattan, 11:15, and there was another collapse. And a firefighter rush past, estimated 50 stories went down. So that can only be Building 7.
Look how that's orchestrated. He's reporting an event that hasn't taken place. A fireman's rushing by to confirm it. They're both actors. They're both on the script, Nick.
Both actors, yeah, right. Okay, next.
Jeremy Baker.
Okay, this is the first fellow, we haven't heard of him, but he seems to be the first guy to put forward this theory that it was meant to collapse. He says about 11:15, and quote, the demolition system in World Trade Center 7 simply did not respond as intended, and the building defiantly remained intact. So I think this is very important, and he also detected something which is quite hard to see in photographs, a huge gouge out of the front, that is the south-facing side of Building 7, the straight, clean, cavernous gash, and that is some sort of destructive process that wouldn't just have been caused by falling debris, and that was, he reckons, part of what was intended to bring it down.
Just to elaborate on the construction of Building 7, it appears to me to have been perhaps the most robust building ever designed by the hand of man. It was erected over 2 enormous electrical generators to provide backup electricity for Lower Manhattan. It was designed to never collapse. To contrast with the Twin Towers, the massive steel beams used in the Twin Towers were hollowed out in the center, which provides still nearly as much strength. But in Building 7, Nick, they use solid steel beams.
Right, okay. Fine, okay. Now, as we mentioned before, in the video you've shown, the fires burnt for about 20 minutes per office fire, and the point is that they couldn't possibly get anywhere remotely near the temperature at which steel goes soft. That is the important and totally obvious fact, which is obvious to most to laymen, but NIST tries to make out that the heat from office fires is enough to bend or damage the steel structure enough to get a descent at free fall speed. So what we're looking at here, this is around floor 12 or 13 and around noon or in the afternoon. Quote, no images showing flames or other evidence of active fires above the 14th floor after 1 o'clock. So the whole upper part of the building, you don't get fires in it. And that's again a problem for NIST because the collapse begins at the top. If you think of that picture of the descent you've seen so often, it's right up the top, so-called penthouse suite at the top, which first descends. That means that the inside has somehow been hollowed out, and so that only the external frame remains, and that can then implode.
And of course, they're not only admitting that office fires typically only burn for around 20 minutes, but they only burn at an average temperature of 500 degrees Fahrenheit, much too low to affect any steel. And in fact, these massive buildings, because of their elaborate structure, are heat sinks. In other words, if you attempted to heat up one part of the steel, it dissipates throughout the entire structure. It's virtually impossible to heat up a steel structure high-rise in any one location sufficient to cause any damage at all. In fact, a test of the North Tower, Nick, back in, 1975, when they had an enormous fire intense in the 11th floor that burned for 3 to 4 hours at around 2,000 degrees, which was what the Underwriters Laboratory had certified the steel to burn 3 to 4 hours with no adverse effects. There were no adverse effects. This was the occasion on which they installed the sprinkler systems, where the explosions in the sub-basements to which you alluded, which William Rodriguez reported, appeared to have been coordinated with the apparent strikes of the planes, where falling jet fuel was going to be used to explain them away, but actually designed to drain the sprinkler systems of water so they couldn't put out the very modest fires that would remain after the fireballs consumed some prepositioned jet fuel or kerosene. It's really a stunning scenario.
Yes, well, I think the sprinklers did work above the 20th floor on this World Trade Center 7, this building 7, which is regarded as why there weren't any fires up there. Somehow they didn't work lower down. Okay. Now we come to the remarkable way in which the firefighters hang around the building and they don't go into it. A lot of firemen were very, very bewildered. You know, this building's burning. We could quite easily put the fires out. Why don't we want to go in? Here's a fire chief saying, we pulled everybody back probably by about 3 o'clock. We said this building is going to come down. So they definitely were told by somebody that the building was going to come down. And inquiries showed that information came from the Mayor Giuliani's Emergency Management Center.
And obviously the fire chief was in on it as well, Nick. It's very, very disturbing, this whole thing. And of course, just before the building collapsed, several NYPD officers told me that Larry Silverstein was on the phone with his insurance carrier to see if they'd authorize the controlled demolition of the building since its foundation was already unstable and expected to fall, which is clearly a false claim. Many law enforcement personnel, firefighters, and other journalists were aware of this possible option. It was not a secret.
Right. Well, he shouldn't have got any insurance payout at all if he's discussing that option.
Of course. I couldn't agree more.
I mean, if the building is wired up for demolition, that is totally implied by his statement. If people heard him making that, having that discussion about whether the building should be demolished because it's unstable, that means it's been wired up, which takes some weeks to do.
Right. It would have to have been previously rigged in order to pull it.
Yeah, okay. Now, this quote, I think to the end of time, it will always be associated with the collapse of Building 7. And he made this, he said, about 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and that is well after the order had been given to the firemen to get away from the building and come out from the building. So pull can hardly have alluded to pulling the firemen out of the building. That is the official claim.
Right, it's a construction term for bringing down by controlled demolition.
Yeah. Now notice he made this a year after the event, on the first anniversary, and by that time he had got his 800 million insurance payout. Okay, so the insurance company had coughed up for the collapse of this building, so maybe he wasn't too bothered, as it were. He was getting going with building the new one, and he wanted to put out a hint of what had made it collapse. You know, besides such terrible loss of life, maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull. I mean, some people object that he's talking to a fire chief. And by the way, that fire chief categorically did not make any call. that phone call did not take place. The fire chief, Daniel Negro, denies making any such call. So it's a fictional story he's made, but he wanted to say it.
Well, there's a verbal hesitation where he said he was speaking with the fire commander, meaning he knew this guy under a different designation when he told him this fanciful story about having had such a terrible loss of life. The smartest thing to do is to pull it. Here, Nick, we can actually hear and watch Larry Silverstein.
A call from that fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. I said, we've had such terrible loss of life. And the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull. And then we watched the building collapse.
Yeah, well, it shows God's chosen people, what God's chosen people can get away with. And let's just recall the huge amount of smoke that you saw in that picture. We'll come back to that in a minute. Nearly a mile high, a vast plume of smoke.
You want me to run this one again, Nick?
No, that's all right. That's all right, Jim. We'll come back to that in a minute. Okay, now this lady, she's written a trilogy of a sort of historical fiction. I think she's the second woman to write a trilogy about 9/11. And she was working in some sort of office that's had the plans for Building 7. But it wasn't she. And she reckons she'd seen the plans and they had the option of controlled demolition in them. And that is what got her going with this concept, security through absurdity. So it's marvelous to have a woman's view of this. I haven't read the books, but this may be a way of getting through to people,
You mentioned the smoke. Here's the first in a series about it.
Whoa, okay. Well, there's something very special about this smoke. It's not ordinary city dust. I believe it's got high iron, about 5% of iron in this dust. That's at least 100 times more than usual dust has. In some way, the substance of the World Trade Centers transformed into this fine white powdery dust. So it seems to be several 100,000 tons turned into this dust, which then spreads over the whole of lower Manhattan. And what happens at 5:20 in the afternoon, this dust has by then subsided, and we then see dust entirely from Building 7. And so let's bear in mind that vast plumes of dust we then see in the late afternoon come just from this one building, okay? Okay, here's one picture. Notice this is quite dark. It becomes quite dark, this smoke. And if you're thinking in terms of fires, you see that as a fire, that will not be very high temperature, that dark smoke.
Right. Lacking in oxygenation, low temperature burns darker. Very high temperature burns much lighter, more thorough combustion.
Right, yeah. Okay, here's another one. It's all coming out of one side of the building. I think Judy Wood is the one author who really talks about this dust process.
He calls it fuming.
Fuming, okay. This happens for several hours before it comes down. And there's an analogy here with the Twin Towers, which likewise fumed for about an hour and a half before they came down. Okay, that is again Building 7 in the background that you see fuming out of one side. Okay,
where the smoke grows darker in the afternoon.
Right. I think this is a view of the south side, and you can see very few offices are burning, and that looks like something that firemen could easily put out. And would
the idea this could be responsible for the destruction of this massive building is frankly absurd.
Yes, it is something impossible. Right. Now, we mentioned earlier pre-announcements of the collapse. Now, we've got an amazing sequence here of official and BBC announcements that the building has collapsed before it actually did, right? From the afternoon, starting at 4:15, a CNN reporter Building 7 has either collapsed or is collapsing. 740.
And yet it wouldn't happen until 5:20 in the afternoon.
Yeah, okay. Greg Braden, Radio 5 Live, a danger of collapse, Building 7, 4:47, BBC World. The Solomon Building in New York has also collapsed. So it's currently saying information that this Building 7 has collapsed. That's 4:47. Then Radio 5 Live, again, another building has collapsed. So it's coming through, collapsed just over an hour ago, which is quite a strange thing to say.
And these are an hour to half an hour prematures.
Yeah. And then,
even at 5:10, it didn't happen until 5:20. I mean, this is shocking. Where the media went with the script, Nick, but the building wasn't in accord with it.
Right. So at 5:10, the BBC World not only saying it's collapsed, but it's explaining why it collapsed. How about that?
And here you had Jane Stanley on the BBC, who was announcing that the Solomon Brothers building had collapsed. This was about 4:57 or 23 minutes prematurely. And there you see the building in the background, Nick, which of course has not.
Well, the BBC needs to do a conspiracy files program investigating itself, which is obviously at the core of whatever disinformation comes out. I may say, if the axis of evil is US, UK, and Israel in their military aspects,
yes,
the UK was involved in promoting the war on terror and in misreporting the event. It didn't actually participate in making the event happen. But,
excellent points, Nick.
Hang on, just go back to Jane Stanley. Okay, now Jane Stanley here. She's announcing its collapse. It's incredible synchrony, and the whole thing then fades out about 5 minutes before the building actually does collapse. And the BBC then loses this file, or claims to have lost it. You know, its files about 9/11. How can you lose that, for God's sake?
Yes.
Oh yeah, we just lost our 9/11 files. Sure you did, yeah. and then that turns up, I think 6 or 7 years later, on the Alex Jones Prison Planet, right? So this then appears on Prison Planet, and the BBC has to explain it. It gets furious emails and phone calls. Can you please explain what you're doing here? How come you reported the event before it happened? You know, and they just said, "Oh, we're not part of the conspiracy. We don't do conspiracy theories." And it's still up now, and you can see the hundreds of furious emails, disgusted and furious emails about this lame excuse. And let's just remember, for the complicity of the BBC, that it starts off the morning about 10 o'clock before the towers have collapsed. It's got the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak, in the BBC World studio talking about who did it, Osama bin Laden, war on terror, trying to launch the whole war on terror before the towers had even collapsed. Okay, so he'd obviously arranged to come to the BBC studio knowing that it was going to happen, right? Yep. So the BBC is totally part of the conspiracy, and it's important that we understand that, right?
Yes. Now here's the sequence showing how classically it comes down. Notice, in contrast to the Twin Towers, it's not blowing apart in every direction from the top down. All the floors are descending at the same time, unlike the World Trade Center 1 and 2, where they all remain in place until they're blown to kingdom come, in the memorable phrase of Morgan Reynolds. The buildings aren't being converted into, this building 7 isn't being converted into millions of cubic yards of very fine dust. And as we've already observed, when it's over, there's a pile of debris equal to about 12% of the height of the original, whereas footprints of 1 and 2, there is nothing. Father Frank Morales actually came on my shows twice, Nick. He was a first responder from St. Mark's Episcopal Church, and he reported on both occasions that the building was blown to or even below ground level. Here's a contrasting sequence for the North Tower, which you can identify by the antenna on the left, as it's being converted into millions of yards of very fine dust. And look at this, Nick. How could anyone possibly confound that with a collapse? Notice building 7 in the foreground in the lower right.
Yeah, well, I think it's the strangest thing that the human race has ever looked at, really. And I doubt if we're going to understand what happened there for quite a while to come. but I think there is some possible argument that this was some sort of nuclear fusion blast, whereas Building 7 doesn't look like that, really.
No, not at all. Oh, yeah. Well, even the U.S. Geological Survey conducted samples of dust at 35 locations in lower Manhattan, Nick, and they found a host of elements that would only have been present in their quantities and correlations had this been a nuclear event, including barium, strontium, lithium, lanthanum, tritium, some of which only exist in radioactive form.
Yeah, well, hang on, just go back there. And those two events had sizable earth tremors. Okay, seismic shock waves are recorded for several seconds as these buildings come down, comparable to sort of earthquakes, whereas that did not happen for Building 7. There's no tremor at 520. So whatever brought it down, it was fundamentally different, as you point out, from the towers, not least in that there was no seismic tremor when it came down. Okay.
Now, here's a report by an expert on controlled demolition. This is quite fascinating. Unfortunately, like Barry Jennings, he paid for this with his life.
De mensen die geloven in het complot hebben het vaak over gebouw nummer 7. Dat was een wolkenkrabber van 47 verdiepingen naast de Twin Towers. Op 11 september 2001 heeft er brand gewoed, maar er is nooit een vliegtuig in gevlogen. Toch is ook dit gebouw op 11 september ingestort. Deze gebeurtenis heeft nooit veel aandacht gekregen en ook Denny Jowenko heeft er nooit van gehoord. Zijn reactie op de beelden die we laten zien is onbevangen.
Zie je vanaf boven gaan? Nee, je gaat vanaf onder.
Die gaat vanaf onder, ja.
Toch?
Ja.
Ze hebben gewoon kolommen weggeblazen. Er is nagesprongen.
Dit valt anders dan het World Trade Center.
Vind je niet dan?
Ja, je ziet het, de onderste verdiepingen gaan eerst.
Ja, en de rest zet er gewoon in. Dus dit is controlled demolition.
Zeker weten.
Zeker weten. Er is nagesprongen. Dit is in opdracht gebeurd. Dat heeft een team gedaan van experts.
Maar het is ook op 11 september gebeurd.
Dezelfde dag?
Dezelfde dag.
Dezelfde dag? Weet je dat zeker?
Ja.
It's a bit unfair trapping him like that. He hadn't agreed to it.
Oh, no. It was very fair because it meant he didn't know in advance it was related to 9/11, Nick.
No, he didn't. Of course he didn't. No.
Hebben ze hard gewerkt.
In het officiële onderzoeksrapport van FEMA staat dat ze niet kunnen verklaren waarom gebouw nummer 7 is ingestort. Uitgebreid bespreken we alle mogelijke oorzaken met Denny Jowenko.
Dat weet ik niet precies, maar ze hebben wel...
Maar hij blijft erbij dat het gebouw is opgeblazen.
Het is vakwerk, zonder meer. We weten heel goed wat ze doen, die jongens.
De vraag is dan, is zoiets van tevoren voorbereid of kan dat op 11 september zelf nog zijn besloten en uitgevoerd?
Met hoeveel man heeft u hoeveel tijd nodig om dat te doen?
Dat weet ik niet precies, maar...
Maakt u een inschatting?
Ja, dan moet je wel ervaren mensen hebben, maar als je een man of 30, 40 zou hebben. Kijk, een paar met de snijbrander, de rest brengt hem aan. Andere mensen sluiten de bedcord met die boosters aan. Dat moet allemaal precies allemaal op hetzelfde moment gaan. En weer een derde die zet de elektronische systemen erop. En dan gaat hij.
Terwijl overal brand was en ook in dat gebouw was brand.
Ja, niet geblust.
Ze hebben de brand niet geblust. Dus de mensen die dat moesten doen, die moesten het doen terwijl het binnen nog brandde.
Ja, dat is vreemd. Dat is vreemd. Dat vind ik ook heel vreemd. Daar heb ik geen verklaring voor.
So who paid with their life for it? You said he paid for his life?
Danny Jowenko died in a mysterious car crash, just as did, Barry Jennings, Nick. They don't like witnesses who blow their cover. This is a deep state and the Israelis that work here. Remember, 9/11 was brought to us compliments of the CIA, the neocons in the Department of Defense, and the Mossad. And they tend to be very unforgiving about those who expose their machinations.
Yeah, okay. Well, here's a bit of simple arithmetic. You've got 610 feet high building, and if you do your maths, distance equals half the acceleration due to gravity times the square of the time, and that gives you a free fall collapse time of, oh no, we've got it wrong here, of 6.2 seconds. It should be 6.2, and the actual collapse time was 6.6.
Right.
Okay.
So it's virtually at the speed of free fall.
Yeah, I'm just pointing out this is simple arithmetic. You don't have to take anyone's word for it. that this is a concept of acceleration, and what it means is that as it fell down, the different floors did not offer resistance. Okay, if there were resistance due to the crunching of steel and metal and concrete, then it would have been, you would not have that free fall acceleration.
That's
so
right. That's right.
It basically means the building has somehow been hollowed out and is not resisting the descent.
Well, Barry Jennings was there where they were conducting, setting off explosives to weaken the building to set it up for this collapse.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Okay. Now, there's another simple statement by this chap David Chandler that this free fall acceleration due to gravity is proof of demolition. That's terribly simple, and I think that's obvious to everyone, actually.
Yes, and here's a graph.
Okay. Yeah. If you want to graph it, this is graph of accelerations, speed against time, showing the g acceleration, and this is immediately obvious at a non-verbal level. Where anyone who sees the collapse of Building 7 in the late afternoon can see that sense that it's not due to fire. Right, here's something quite mysterious that is often missed out. After it collapses, a minute or so after, a huge mushroom cloud starts to gather, nearly a mile high, 7 times higher than Building 7. And what is this all about? If you had thermite controlled demolition, would you really get that? I mean, we've got 3 different hypotheses. You've got thermite, you've got nukes, or you've got the unknown, exotic technology hypothesized by Judy Wood. And I think we should just say that we don't know what the power is.
Well, you and I disagree about this, Nick, but that's just fine. I mean,
Well, what's your view on this? Well, what are you saying? Are you saying that it's a nukes brought this down?
Oh, you mean Building 7?
Yeah, Building 7, yeah.
Oh, no, I was meaning for the North and the South Tower. No, I'm open-minded. Don Fox believes there were nukes used in Building 7 too, but it seems to me Barry Jawenko nailed it, that it's a classic controlled demolition. I there find the difference between Building 7 and 1 and 2 to be very significant and striking and most basic to understanding what happened to the World Trade Center.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to have a bit more detail about the dust of Building 7, analysed by itself and separate from the others. Does it have similar characteristics to the dust of World Trade Center 1 and 2? The spheres of iron, which show the little microspheres of iron, which show the very high temperature. Certainly, what the New York Times said was the deepest mystery of World Trade Center 7, specifically World Trade Center 7, the deepest mystery was the steel, which had holes in it, and it looked like it had been vaporized. It was thinned out with sharp edges and bent, as if some very high temperature process had been applied to it. So that's the New York Times opinion.
And here you can see on the left of the 5.5 floors remnant from Building 7, in the immediate foreground on the right, you can see where Building 1 stood, and although it was more than twice as tall at 110 floors versus 47, there's nothing there. There are other photographs that show that the buildings 1 and 2 were indeed destroyed. 2 were even slightly below ground level, where in between, of course, we have Building 6 with this huge kind of cavity there in the middle.
Yeah. Poor. Right. Well, this gives a topical relevance. In London, we had this tower suddenly went up like a firework, a Roman candle, and people said, "Look, this must have been pre-prepared." It burnt very brightly, quite suddenly, and immolated quite a lot of people in it. But there's no hint that it was going to collapse. That's the important thing. So after that, far fiercer fires than anything in Building 7. How come it didn't collapse? So this gives a new relevance to this whole enigma we're looking at.
Absolutely. There are many other high-rise structures that have been subjected to vastly more intense fires for vastly longer periods of time that did not collapse because, to reiterate, no steel structure high-rise ever collapsed from fire before 9/11, after 9/11, or on 9/11.
Right, yeah. Well, that's pretty simple. That's a very simple negative statement we can make. Okay, now, you got the insurance payout. We've already said this. on the understanding that it had been destroyed by fire. So that might be part of the bind that NIST felt it was in, that New Yorkers were getting their marvelous new World Trade Center, super duper new World Trade Center, on the strength of the insurance payout. Yeah.
All stunning.
Right. Well, this gives it whole new relevance to this story now, because partly we've had the first ever British University lecture on what happened on 9/11. Right. This seems to be the first time any British university has dared to give a lecture to its students on the question of what happened on that day, and it was Queen Mary's College London, and it was totally endorsing the NIST report, because this fellow Colin Bailey had been involved as a consultant for this report, and
embarrassingly, he's argued that it was due to fire.
Well, yeah, of course he did. He gave very complicated, sophistical, models and so on, which reminds me of the years I spent in academia. There can be very clever, sophistical arguments which superficially may sound rational, but are actually totally absurd, and they're unreal. They're not in touch with the real world at all. So he gave, complicated computer models. But the point is that the models that NIST, which, by the way, they refused to show anyone. They said, "Oh yeah, we've got a computer model," but they then would not show it, won't go public with it. But the NIST model has one side of Building 7 collapse. Girders collapse down one side. And so the puzzle is, well, why don't we see any one-sided collapse? Why does it come down totally symmetrical if you've got your model shows a one-sided collapse? So the NIST model doesn't look much like at all what happens. And there is this academic report which is due out soon, and there's been preliminary reports of it, the University of Alaska Fairbanks report, and that contradicts the NIST conclusion. It makes no suggestion, obviously, of what did bring the towers down, but it denies the NIST. It will deny the NIST conclusion that fire brought it down.
Yes, which obviously did not happen. Your brilliant book, Chronicles of False Flag Terror, where you illustrate 13 different cases of false flag attacks in Europe, which is absolutely sensational and available at moonrockabooks.com.
Right, and is it now on amazon.co.uk, did you say?
Yes.
Oh, right. Okay, well, let's hope the price will, yeah.
And Nick, I just want to thank you for coming on. This has been a simply marvelous presentation about Building 7. Very convincing that NIST got it wrong, that the building could not possibly have come down due to the very modest fires, that NIST is covering, that it was a classic controlled demolition, as Danny Jawenko explained, and that it was taking place at roughly free fall speed, which of course contradicts any theory that this was due to fire. Had it been, it would have done asymmetrical, partial collapse, nothing complete, total, and abrupt as actually took place on the occasion.
Right.
20 in the afternoon.
Yeah. Okay, Jim. Well, I think that's all, is it?
Yep, I think we're good, Nick. I want to thank you so very much for joining me. This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, expressing my profound appreciation to Nick Kollerstorm for a brilliant exposition of Building 7, and all of you for watching.
In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade.
That's what we were told. Most Americans never believed Lee Oswald was the lone gunman, for excellent reasons. In fact, there were at least 6 shooters who fired from 8 to 10 shots or more who are identified here. We have, finally, the solution to the greatest murder mystery in history, laid out for the world to see, proof after proof after proof. Photos were faked, the body was changed, x-rays were altered, the home movies were fixed. 15 experts contribute to a 529-page book with 1,037 photos and diagrams in black and white and color.
Hi, this is Gary King. If you'd like JFK, who, how, and why, and would like to support the new JFK show, then go to patriotradiobooks.com. That's patriotradiobooks.com.